To get a better idea about factor by grouping, I'm going to do a little reminder of taking out a GCF. So if you have something that's like, I don't know, 5x plus 15. All right, so this is just kind of like prereq knowledge here. 5x plus 15. The greatest common factor for 5x plus 15 is 5. And so typically we know that we write that outside and then we have a set of parentheses. Now, what may become sort of second nature to you is that what you're actually doing here is you're dividing out this greatest common factor. So you're taking this first term and dividing by 5, and you're taking the second term and dividing by 5. I'm going to move this down some. And so you are dividing out the greatest common factor, and that's what gets written on the outside. And what's on the inside is whatever is left over after you divide out what they have in common. 5x divided by 5 is x. 15 divided by 5 is 3. Okay. All right. I say all this to say, mainly because you're going to kind of see this a little bit better with our factor by grouping, now that this may make a little bit more sense. So we're going to do an example with factor by grouping, keeping in mind that this is what is happening right here. This is what happens when you take out a GCF. Okay, because you have to know how to do that before factor by grouping is really effective when you write it like this. Okay. So I'm going to do a video, an example from one of the other videos that we started with. So if you've watched another video, you're going to see this same problem, but it's just going to be in a different method. Do a squiggle. So we're going to have 2x squared minus 3x equals 20. Right? Factoring by grouping, you can have a as a negative value and it still works out. You'll have to then factor out a -1 at the very end. I would say best rule of thumb is to try and keep a positive. It just makes sure that that negative does not find its way in there. So I am going to keep my a value positive by moving the 20 over. So what factoring by grouping for a trinomial does. All right, factoring by grouping for a trinomial, what we are doing is we are what some people call breaking apart the b term. We are taking this b term right here and we are splitting it into two different terms so that we have a 4-term polynomial. You have to have 4 terms in order to factor by grouping. All right, maybe an important part here. You must have 4 terms. This is not required. This is not the required way of factoring a trinomial. However, we are going to get into polynomials with 4 terms where you will be required to factor by grouping. So it's possibly a good thing to go ahead and see now while we're doing it with a trinomial. So when we are here, you can still use the X little method that most of us tend to start off with. So a times c, 2 times -20 is -40. Your b value is -3. And so those two terms become -8 and 5. And so what we do with the area model, you take those values, the -8 and 5, and put it in the area model. With factor by grouping, you take these two values, and those are the two values that get split up for your b term, -8x and 5x. So we've split apart the b, and if we bring down, yes, this is technically a positive 5x because -8x plus 5x gives us -3x. If we bring down our a and our c term, so -20, and then we have our 2x squared. If we bring those down, you see that we have now created a polynomial with 4 terms. 2x squared minus 8x plus 5x minus 20. And now factoring by grouping is an option that we can take. Factor by grouping, you take the first 2 terms, group them together. You take the second 2 terms, group them together. And we're going to take out a GCF of the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms. Remember, that means we are dividing out what they have in common. So 2x squared minus 8x, what they have in common here is going to be a 2x. So what we're doing is we are dividing both of these by 2x and writing it outside. 2x squared divided by 2x leaves us with x. Negative 8x divided by 2x leaves us with a negative 4. We're going to do the same thing with the other side. I'll do this yellow. 5x and negative 20. Our GCF is going to be 5. So when we divide both sides or both pieces of this by 5, the GCF that they have in common goes outside. And then after you divide it out, 5x divided by 5 is x. Negative 20 divided by 5 gives us a negative 4. Something to notice here when we are factoring by grouping. You may already see it. You may know where I'm going with this. But these 2 inside terms here, sorry, yellow on yellow there, are the same. That should happen with factor by grouping. If those 2 binomials within the parentheses are not the same, then we cannot factor by grouping. It's not going to work. Once those are the same and you're good to go, you're actually going to do another greatest common factor dividing out. All right, so just so you can understand what is happening here, because we're trying to get to a binomial times a binomial when we factor. This right here, so I'm going to do it with a different color maybe. This is one term, technically. 2x times x minus 4. This right here is another term, 5 times x minus 4. Do these 2 terms have anything in common? They do. They both have an x plus 4 in common. So I am going to divide both of these by x, not x plus 4, x minus 4. I'm sorry. And whatever you divide goes out front, so you have x minus 4. And whatever is left after the division goes in the parentheses. So x minus 4 divided by x minus 4, we're now left with 2x. X minus 4 divided by x minus 4, those cancel out. We're left with plus 5. So that is a more in-depth looking at factoring by grouping, the whys and the hows of how that works. It only works for 4 terms. If you're working with a trinomial, you can break the trinomial apart. So I'll number these pieces even. Okay, if you're working with a trinomial, first you have to break it into 4 parts. So that was our first step. I'll even label this as 1. And then we took out our GCFs, which was our step number 2. And then we had to factor another GCF out, which was that step number 3 right there. Once all of those are done, we have our 2 binomials where we can now set it equal to 0 and solve. X minus 4 equals 0, so x equals 4. 2x plus 5 equals 0, so x equals 5/2. If you would like to try another one with factor by grouping, I'm going to put an example up here that you can try. And then I will also go over it within this video. So let me get an example. I'll do this one. There you go. So go ahead and try this. Pause this video if you want to. I'm going to actually talk through the second one again. So pause this video if you want to try it on your own. Again, my rule of thumb, keep A positive. It just makes things a little bit easier. All right, so I'm going to start walking through this. If you are still working and I'm now started to talk to you, you may want to pause the video. So I'm going to get everything to one side first. 2x squared. We're going to have a minus 15x plus 7. That's going to equal 0. We can then set up our x if we need to. 2 times 7 is 14. And our negative 15 down here. So what multiplies to be 14, but then adds to be negative 15. Our only options here are negative 1 and negative 14. So negative 1 and negative 14 are going to be the values. So this negative 1, this negative 14, they are going to be the values of us splitting this trinomial into a 4-term polynomial. So we will have a negative 1x and a negative 14x. Again, you can just bring down the first term, 2x squared and 7. We will group the first two terms, group the second two terms. I did not mean for this to happen, but it did. We'll talk about it in a second with negatives here. So 2x squared minus 1x. Just looking at this, there doesn't look like we have a GCF, but always remember 1 is always a GCF, or a value of x is also a GCF. So they both have an x in common. So remember what we're doing is we are dividing by x here. And x goes on the outside because that's what we're dividing by. 2x squared divided by x leaves us with 2x. Negative 1x divided by x leaves us with negative 1. Negative 14x plus 7. Our GCF here is going to be 7. But if I notice here, if I only divide by 7, negative 14 divided by 7 is going to give me a negative 2. But remember, I want to match this 2x minus 1. So I am going to divide by negative 7. So when I divide by negative 7, I'm taking out a negative 7. That ensures that my middle pieces are going to be the same. Negative 14x divided by negative 7 gives us a positive 2x. And 7 divided by negative 7 is going to give us a negative 1. We now see that these two have the same interior polynomial, which means we can divide by that. We divide both of these by 2x minus 1 because that is their GCF. 2x minus 1 is on the outside. And what is left over after this division, these cancel. We are left with x minus 7. And then we can finish solving. We will have 2x minus 1 equals 0. So x equals 1/2. X minus 7 equals 0. So x equals 7. So that is factoring by grouping with a trinomial.